The crowd's voices buzzed like angry hornets as the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty auction square of San Jose, California. It was June 1875, and Abigail Greene clutched her swollen belly, feeling the world spin dangerously around her. The auctioneer's rapid-fire cadence faded to a distant hum as the ground beneath her feet seemed to tilt. She'd been standing for nearly 3 hours now, determined to bid on a small plot of farmland that could give her unborn child a chance at a decent life, but her strength was finally failing her. Blake Dawson noticed the pregnant woman from his position at the edge of the crowd. Her face had gone pale as parchment, and while others were focused on the bidding war for a prime cattle grazing area, he saw her sway dangerously. He was already moving through the throng when her knees buckled and she began to fall. He reached her just in time, his strong arms catching her before she hit the dirt. The crowd parted as Blake gathered the unconscious woman against his chest, her chestnut hair spilling over his arm. "Someone fetch the doctor," a woman called out from the crowd. "She needs water." Another voice added, but Blake had already made his decision as he looked down at the beautiful, vulnerable woman in his arms, her hand still protectively curved over her pregnant belly even in unconsciousness. "She's coming home with me," he declared firmly, his voice cutting through the murmurs of concern. The authority in his tone brooked no argument as he strode toward his wagon at the edge of the square. Several women followed him, clucking with concern. "You can't just take her, Mr. Dawson," protested Mrs. Hollister, the milliner's wife. "What would people say?" "They can say what they like," Blake replied, carefully settling Abigail on the wagon seat. "My housekeeper is at the ranch, and there's plenty of room." "Would you rather I leave her lying in the dirt while gossips decide her fate?" Mrs. Hollister's lips thinned, but she nodded reluctantly. "I'll come along to help. A pregnant woman needs another woman's attendance." Blake didn't argue as the older woman climbed aboard. He needed to know more about the mysterious woman who had collapsed, who she was, where she'd come from, and most importantly, why a woman in her delicate condition was alone at an auction block in the first place. As his wagon rattled down the dusty road leading out of San Jose toward his ranch 10 miles east, Abigail stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Panic flashed across her face as she realized she was moving in an unfamiliar wagon with strangers. "Be still now, Mrs." Hollister soothed, pressing a damp cloth to Abigail's forehead. "You fainted dead away at the auction. This is Mr. Blake Dawson. He's taking you to his ranch to recover." Abigail's green eyes widened with alarm. "No, I can't. I need to get back." "The land parcel, the auction's over for today, miss," Blake said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Your health is more important than any piece of land." "You don't understand," Abigail insisted, struggling to sit up straighter. "That land was my last hope." Her voice broke and she turned her face away, but not before Blake glimpsed the tears she was fighting to hold back. "I'm Abigail Greene," she said after collecting herself. "And I appreciate your kindness, but I need to return to town. I have a room at the boarding house." Blake's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Hollister, would you say that boarding house is any place for a woman in her condition who's prone to fainting spells?" Before the older woman could answer, Abigail cut in. "My condition is not your concern, Mr. Dawson, and it was the heat, nothing more. I'm perfectly capable of caring for myself." Blake glanced at her, taking in her threadbare dress, the worn soles of her shoes visible beneath her hem, and the determined set of her chin that couldn't quite disguise her exhaustion. "Forgive me for saying so, Mrs. Greene, but you don't appear to be doing a particularly good job of it." "Miss," Abigail corrected stiffly, "and you know nothing about me or my circumstances." I know that a woman expecting a child shouldn't be standing for hours in the blistering sun without so much as a hat or a drink of water, Blake replied evenly. I know that you're in no condition to be alone right now. And I know that my ranch has cool rooms, fresh water, and a housekeeper who makes the best chicken soup west of the Mississippi. Mrs. Hollister nodded in agreement. He's right, dear. Just stay a day or two until you're stronger. Mr. Dawson is one of the most respected ranchers in the county. His reputation is beyond reproach. Abigail's hand went protectively to her belly as the baby kicked, as if adding its opinion to the conversation. She was so tired, and the thought of going back to her tiny, stifling room at Mrs. Finch's boarding house held little appeal. Still, she hesitated. I can't pay you, she admitted softly, hating the words as they left her mouth. Blake's expression softened slightly. I'm not asking for payment, Miss Greene. Just allowing me to help you would be enough. Something in his voice, a note of sincerity that couldn't be feigned, made Abigail relent. 2 days, she agreed reluctantly. But then I must return to town. I have matters to attend to. Blake nodded, relief washing over him. He didn't understand why he cared so much about what happened to this stubborn, proud woman. But something about her courage in the face of what were clearly dire circumstances touched something in him he'd thought long buried. The wagon continued its journey along the dusty road, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wheels filling the silence. Abigail watched the landscape change from the town's cluttered buildings to rolling golden hills dotted with oak trees. Despite her determination to remain aloof, she couldn't help feeling a sense of peace as they left San Jose behind. Your ranch is at large, she asked finally, if only to break the silence. A small smile tugged at Blake's lips. Large enough. 600 acres. Cattle mostly, but some crops too. It's called River Spend. Because of the Sacramento River, Abigail inquired, remembering the geography she'd studied before coming west. There's a bend in a smaller tributary that cuts through the southeast corner of the property, Blake explained. Best fishing spot in the county, though I rarely find the time these days. Abigail nodded, trying to ignore how the movement of the wagon was making her dizzy again. Mrs. Hollister noticed and pressed the damp cloth back to her forehead. Not much further now, dear, the older woman assured her. Just over that rise and we'll see the ranch house. True to her word, as they crested the hill, Abigail caught her first glimpse of Riverspend. The main house was larger than she had expected, a sprawling 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front, painted a clean white with green shutters. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing peacefully. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to Blake Dawson's hard work and success. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a tidy bun, her face weathered but kind. That's Mrs. Ramirez, Blake said. My housekeeper. She's been with me since I bought this place 10 years ago. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Mrs. Ramirez hurried forward, her brow furrowing when she saw Abigail. Que paso? She asked Blake, then seeing Abigail was conscious, switched to English. What happened? Who is this poor girl? This is Miss Greene, Blake explained as he jumped down from the wagon. She collapsed at the auction. She's going to stay with us for a few days to recover. Mrs. Ramirez nodded, her practical nature immediately taking over. The blue room is ready. I will prepare some broth and tea. She moved to help Abigail down from the wagon, but Blake stepped in. I'll carry her inside, he said. And before Abigail could protest, he had lifted her as effortlessly as if she weighed nothing at all, one arm supporting her back and the other beneath her knees. "This is unnecessary," Abigail insisted, mortified by her position yet unable to deny that she felt too weak to walk. "I can manage." "I'm sure you can," Blake replied, already climbing the porch steps. "But humor me." Inside, the house was cool and smelled of beeswax and fresh baked bread. Blake carried Abigail up a wide staircase to the second floor and down a hallway to a corner bedroom. The blue room, as Mrs. Ramirez had called it, was painted a soft sky blue with white trim and featured a large window that overlooked the distant hills. A four-poster bed with a handmade quilt dominated the space, alongside a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small writing desk, and a comfortable-looking rocking chair. Blake set Abigail down gently on the edge of the bed. "Mrs. Ramirez will bring you something to eat soon. There's fresh water in the pitcher and clean towels on the washstand. If you need anything else, just call out. These walls aren't as thick as they look." Abigail smoothed her skirts, feeling oddly vulnerable now that she was sitting on this stranger's bed. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Dawson. It's unexpected." Something flickered in Blake's blue eyes, a shadow of some old pain quickly masked. "Get some rest, Miss Greene. We can talk more when you're feeling stronger." After he left, Mrs. Hollister helped Abigail remove her shoes and loosen her dress for comfort, then departed with promises to check on her the following day. Mrs. Ramirez soon arrived with a tray bearing a bowl of fragrant chicken broth, a pot of herbal tea, and several thick slices of fresh bread with butter. "Eat," the housekeeper instructed firmly. "Everything. You are too thin for a woman carrying a child." Too tired to argue, Abigail complied, surprised by how hungry she was. The broth was indeed delicious, rich with herbs and vegetables, and the bread still warm from the oven. As she ate, she found herself studying the room, noting the quality of the furnishings and the small touches that made it feel like a home rather than just a house. Fresh wildflowers in a vase on the desk, lace curtains that stirred in the breeze from the open window, and a small shelf of books within easy reach of the bed. By the time she'd finished eating, exhaustion had caught up with her completely. She managed to wash her face and hands at the basin before crawling beneath the quilt, still wearing her day dress. The last thing she remembered before falling into a deep sleep was the distant sound of a man's voice, Blake's voice, speaking softly to someone downstairs, and the surprising feeling of safety that washed over her in this stranger's home. When Abigail awoke, golden afternoon light was streaming through the windows. For a moment, she was disoriented, unused to such a comfortable bed and spacious room after months in Mrs. Finch's cramped boarding house. Then the events of the morning came flooding back, and she pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing at the stiffness in her back. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," Abigail called, hastily smoothing her hair. Mrs. Ramirez entered, carrying a tray with a pitcher of water and a small bundle. "You slept for 4 hours," she said. "How do you feel?" "Better, thank you," Abigail replied honestly. The rest had done her good and the dizziness had passed. "Good, I brought you some clean clothes." Mrs. Ramirez set down the tray and held up the bundle, a simple blue cotton dress. "It belonged to Mr. Dawson's sister when she visited last year. It should fit you, even with the baby." Abigail hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Her own dress was wrinkled and travel-stained after days of wear. Finally, practicality won. "That's very kind. Please thank Mr. Dawson for me." Mrs. Ramirez helped Abigail change, tactfully ignoring the patches in her undergarments, and the way her ribs showed too prominently above her swollen belly. The blue dress was indeed a good fit, with room for her pregnancy, and made of a light, breathable fabric perfect for the California summer. Mr. Dawson had to ride out to check on some cattle, Mrs. Ramirez explained as she helped Abigail pin her hair. "He will be back for supper. Until then, you should rest or perhaps sit on the porch where it's cool. Dr. Ellis will come by this evening to check on you." "A doctor?" "That's not necessary," Abigail protested. "It was just the heat, truly." Mrs. Ramirez fixed her with a stern look. "Mr. Dawson insisted, and he is not a man who changes his mind easily. Besides, when was the last time you saw a doctor for the baby?" Abigail looked away, unable to meet the older woman's eyes. "In St. Louis, 3 months ago." Mrs. Ramirez clicked her tongue disapprovingly but said nothing more on the subject. Instead, she helped Abigail downstairs and out to the porch, where a comfortable chair with cushions awaited her, along with a small table bearing a glass of lemonade and a plate of shortbread cookies. "I will be in the kitchen if you need anything," Mrs. Ramirez said. "Just call." Left alone, Abigail sipped her lemonade and gazed out at the ranch spreading before her. A gentle breeze stirred the oak trees, bringing with it the scent of grass and wildflowers. In the distance, she could see men working with cattle, tiny figures moving purposefully across the landscape. The peaceful scene was so far removed from the noise and desperation of her recent existence that it almost felt like she'd stumbled into someone else's dream. Her hand moved to her belly as the baby kicked energetically. "I know," she whispered. "This isn't our place. But we'll enjoy it while we can, won't we?" As the afternoon wore on, Abigail found herself growing drowsy again in the warm air. She was just considering whether she should go back upstairs when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. Blake Dawson was riding toward the house on a magnificent chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the western sky. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and confidence that she'd noticed even amid the chaos of her collapse at the auction. He dismounted in one fluid movement and handed the reins to a stable boy who came running. As he approached the porch, he removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly where it had been dampened with sweat. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "Miss Greene," he greeted her, climbing the porch steps. "You're looking better." Abigail straightened in her chair, suddenly conscious of wearing his sister's dress. "Yes, thank you. Your housekeeper has been very kind. Mrs. Ramirez takes good care of everyone," Blake said with a smile, "though she can be a bit of a tyrant in the kitchen." "I heard that," came Mrs. Ramirez's voice from an open window, making both of them laugh. Blake took a seat in the chair beside Abigail's, stretching out his long legs. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't simply blue but a striking shade that reminded her of the sky just before dusk, deep and bottomless. "I hope you don't mind, but I asked around about you in town," he said, his directness catching her off guard. Abigail tensed. "And what did your inquiries reveal, Mr. Dawson?" "Not much, I'm afraid. Only that you arrived in San Jose about a month ago on the stagecoach from Sacramento, that you keep to yourself, and that you've been looking for work even though." His eyes flickered to her belly. "Even though no one wants to hire a woman in my condition," Abigail finished for him, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Yes, that's true enough, which is why I was at that auction. I had saved enough for a small plot, something to call my own." Blake studied her thoughtfully. "Land isn't easy to manage alone even in the best of circumstances, with a child coming." "I'm stronger than I look," Abigail said defensively, "and I've learned farming. My father taught me before he—" She trailed off, unwilling to share more of her past than necessary. Blake seemed to sense her reluctance and changed the subject. "Dr. Ellis will be here after supper. He's a good man. Delivered half the babies in the county, including my foreman's twins last winter." Abigail nodded, resigned to the examination. "I appreciate the concern, though it's more than I've come to expect from strangers." "Well, we're not exactly strangers anymore, are we?" Blake's expression was warm but respectful. "Not after I carried you up those stairs like a sack of grain." A small smile tugged at Abigail's lips despite herself. A very ungraceful introduction, I admit. Before Blake could respond, Mrs. Ramirez appeared at the door. "Supper is ready," she announced, "and Miss Greene needs to eat for two, so come inside before it gets cold." The dining room was as well appointed as the rest of the house, with a long oak table that could seat 12, though only 3 places were set now. The meal was simple but abundant. Roast chicken, new potatoes with herbs, fresh greens from the kitchen garden, and warm rolls that released a cloud of steam when broken open. Abigail hadn't eaten so well in months, perhaps longer, and though she tried to maintain her manners, she couldn't help eating with obvious enjoyment. Blake watched her with satisfaction, pleased to see color returning to her cheeks. There was something about this woman that intrigued him, her proud bearing despite her circumstances, the intelligence in her green eyes, and the fierce protectiveness with which she cradled her unborn child. He found himself wondering about the father, and whether the man was dead or had abandoned her. Neither scenario reflected well on the missing man, in Blake's opinion. The conversation during dinner remained light, with Blake telling stories about the ranch and Mrs. Ramirez occasionally interjecting with her own observations. Abigail spoke little, but Blake noticed how attentively she listened, as if storing away information for future use. As they were finishing dessert, a rich apple pie with cream, the sound of a buggy approaching announced Dr. Ellis's arrival. Mrs. Ramirez showed him into the parlor, where Abigail waited nervously. Dr. Ellis was an older man with kind eyes and a reassuring manner. He greeted Abigail warmly before turning to Blake. "I'll need privacy for the examination, of course." "Of course," Blake agreed. "Mrs. Ramirez will assist. I'll be on the porch if you need anything." The examination was thorough but gentle. Dr. Ellis listened to Abigail's heart and the baby's, measured her belly, and asked detailed questions about her health and the pregnancy. Abigail answered as honestly as she could, though she glossed over the extent of her recent hardships. "The baby seems healthy," Dr. Ellis concluded, packing away his instruments. "Strong heartbeat, good position. You're about 7 months along, I'd say." "Almost 8, Abigail corrected softly. The doctor nodded. "As for you, young lady, you're suffering from exhaustion and mild malnourishment, nothing that can't be remedied with rest and proper food." He fixed her with a stern look. "No more standing for hours in the sun. No heavy lifting or strenuous work, and for heaven's sake, eat everything Mrs. Ramirez puts in front of you." "I'll see that she does," Mrs. Ramirez promised, giving Abigail a look that brooked no argument. After the doctor left, Blake found Abigail back on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. Stars were beginning to appear in the twilight sky, and a chorus of crickets had started their nightly serenade. "What did Ellis say?" Blake asked, joining her. "That I'm to rest and eat like a farmhand," Abigail replied with a small smile, "and that the baby is healthy, thankfully." Blake nodded, relief washing over him. "Good, that's good news." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Finally, Abigail spoke, her voice soft in the darkness. "I should tell you why I was at that auction," she said. "You've shown me kindness and you deserve honesty in return." Blake turned to her, his expression serious. "You don't owe me an explanation, Miss Greene." "Perhaps not, but I'd like to give you one anyway." Abigail took a deep breath. "I came west because I had nowhere else to go. My parents died last year, influenza. The family farm in Missouri was heavily mortgaged, and after the bank took it, I had only my small inheritance. I thought I could make a fresh start in California. She paused, her hands twisting together in her lap. I met James on the journey west. He was charming, full of plans and promises. Said he had land waiting in Sacramento that we'd build a life together. A bitter smile crossed her face. I believed him. We were married in a small ceremony in Denver, continued west together. Blake could guess where this story was going, but he remained silent, letting her speak at her own pace. There was no land, of course. James disappeared in Sacramento, taking what remained of my money. By the time I realized he wasn't coming back, I was already with child. Abigail's voice remained steady, though Blake could see the effort it cost her. I managed to find work as a seamstress for a time, saved enough to reach San Jose. I thought perhaps I could buy a small piece of land, build a cabin, grow enough to feed myself and the child. Alone. Blake couldn't keep the concern from his voice. Abigail lifted her chin. I had no other option. Blake was silent for a long moment, processing her story and admiring her courage even as he recognized the impossibility of her plan. Finally, he spoke. There was another plot of land up for auction tomorrow. Smaller than what you were looking at, but with a cabin already built. Not much more than a shack, really, but it has a good well and fertile soil. About 20 acres. Abigail looked at him, confused. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm going to buy it for you, Blake said simply. Abigail's eyes widened in shock. Absolutely not. I couldn't possibly accept such charity. It's not charity, Blake insisted. It's an investment. The cabin needs work, new roof, repairs to the porch, that sort of thing. You can repay me by making those improvements over time, and by selling me a portion of whatever crops you manage to grow. But why would you do this for a stranger? Blake's expression was unreadable in the gathering darkness. Let's just say I know what it's like to need a second chance. Abigail was speechless, overwhelmed by his offer and the possibilities it presented. A home for her child, land of her own, a chance at independence rather than destitution. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. Say you'll accept, Blake replied. Say you'll let me help you build something that can sustain you and your child. Abigail hesitated, her pride warring with practicality once more. I would need to see this land first, and I would insist on a proper business arrangement with terms written down and agreed upon. A smile spread across Blake's face. I'd expect nothing less. We can ride out tomorrow to look at it if Dr. Ellis approves, and my lawyer in town can draw up whatever paperwork would make you comfortable. Abigail nodded slowly, still stunned by this unexpected turn of events. Thank you, Mr. Dawson. I don't quite understand why you're doing this, but I'm grateful. Blake stood, offering her his hand to help her rise. Get some rest, Miss Greene. Tomorrow will be a busy day. As Abigail made her way upstairs, her mind was whirling with questions and possibilities. Why was this man, this stranger, showing her such extraordinary kindness? Could she trust him, or would this prove to be another bitter disappointment like James? And yet, something in Blake Dawson's steady gaze and quiet strength inspired a confidence she hadn't felt in anyone for a very long time. That night, Abigail slept more soundly than she had in months, cradled in the comfortable bed with her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Whatever happened tomorrow, for tonight at least, she was safe. Morning brought clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for inspecting the property Blake had mentioned. After a breakfast that left Abigail feeling almost uncomfortably full, Mrs. Ramirez had insisted on seconds of everything. Dr. Ellis arrived to check on her again. Much better already, he pronounced, patting her hand. A short wagon ride should be fine as long as you don't overexert yourself. Blake had arranged for a cushioned buggy rather than the rougher farm wagon, and by mid-morning they were on their way. The property was about 5 miles from Riverspend, closer to town but still secluded enough to offer privacy. As they traveled, Blake pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area and its history. "San Jose is growing fast," he told her. "The railroads brought more people every year. Land values are increasing steadily. In a few years, your 20 acres could be worth twice what I'm paying now." "If I decide to accept your offer," Abigail reminded him, though she had largely made up her mind to do so, assuming the land was at all viable. Blake smiled knowingly but didn't press the point. Instead, he changed the subject. "Tell me about your life before in Missouri. You said your father taught you farming." Abigail nodded, memories washing over her. "We had a small farm about a day's ride from St. Louis. Nothing fancy, but it provided well enough for us. My father believed a woman should know how to do everything a man could do, just in case, he always said." She smiled sadly. "My mother thought it most improper, but she didn't interfere." "Sounds like a wise man," Blake commented. "He was," Abigail agreed softly. "I miss them both terribly." She looked out at the passing landscape, blinking back sudden tears. "What about your family? Are your parents still living?" Blake's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "No, they died when I was young. My sister and I were raised by our uncle in Boston. Not a farmer's life by any means. He was a businessman, wanted me to follow in his footsteps." "But you chose this instead," Abigail observed. "What brought you west?" Blake was silent for so long that Abigail thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice had a carefully neutral quality. "I needed a fresh start. Like you, I suppose. I came west when I was 20, worked on ranches for years before saving enough to buy Riverspend. That was 10 years ago now." There was clearly more to the story, but Abigail didn't press. She had her own secrets, after all. The buggy rounded a bend in the road and Blake pointed ahead. "There it is." Abigail leaned forward eagerly. A small cabin stood in a clearing, surrounded by oak trees that provided welcome shade. A stone well with a hand pump was visible to one side, and beyond stretched acres of open land, some of it already cleared for planting. The cabin itself was indeed in need of repair. The roof sagged in places, and the small porch had a broken step, but it was substantially built of sturdy logs. "It's not much," Blake said apologetically as he helped her down from the buggy. "But with some work—" "It's perfect," Abigail breathed, surprising herself with how much she meant it. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the sight of this modest cabin represented something she'd almost given up hoping for: a home. Blake led her on a tour of the property, showing her the boundaries marked by a small stream to the west and a line of oak trees to the east. The soil was rich and dark when he dug his fingers into it, and the well produced clean, cold water when he worked the pump. Inside, the cabin was simple but sound: one main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom off to the side, and a lean-to that could serve as a kitchen. The previous owner had left some basic furniture: a table with 2 chairs, a bed frame that needed a new mattress, and a rocking chair beside the fireplace. "What happened to the people who lived here before?" Abigail asked, running her hand along the rough-hewn mantel. "Older couple. Decided to move back east to live with their daughter after the husband took ill. Couldn't manage the place anymore." Blake gestured around the room. "It needs a woman's touch, but it's solid. The roof leaks in the corner there, and the chimney should be checked before winter, but nothing that can't be fixed." Abigail turned slowly, taking it all in. The space was small but far more than she'd dared hope for. She could already envision where she'd place a cradle for the baby, how she'd hang curtains to brighten the windows, where she might plant a kitchen garden just outside the door. "How much?" she asked finally, her practical side asserting itself. "What would the terms be?" Blake named a figure that seemed suspiciously low to Abigail. "That can't be the market value." "It's what I'm willing to pay," Blake said firmly. "As for terms between us, I propose this. I'll purchase the property and hold the deed. You'll make improvements as you're able and pay me back over 5 years with interest lower than any bank would offer. I'll take a portion of your crops as part of the payment. Once the debt is cleared, the land is yours, free and clear." Abigail considered the offer. "It was more than fair generous to a fault, in fact. And if I can't make the payments, if the crops fail then we'll renegotiate," Blake said simply. "I'm not looking to take advantage, Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her breath catch. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, needing to understand. "You barely know me." Blake's blue eyes held her steadily. "Because I believe everyone deserves a chance to build a life on their own terms. Because I can help and it costs me little to do so. And because—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Because I admire your courage, coming west alone, facing whatever comes with your head held high." Abigail felt a blush warm her cheeks at his praise. "It's not courage so much as necessity," she said, looking away. "I've found those often go hand in hand," Blake replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of the decision before her hanging in the air between them. Finally, Abigail nodded. "I accept your offer, Mr. Dawson, provided the terms are written as you've described them." Blake's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his features, making him appear younger and somehow more approachable. "Excellent. I'll speak to my lawyer tomorrow." As they prepared to leave, Abigail paused in the doorway of what would soon be her home, committing every detail to memory. A sense of cautious hope blossomed in her chest, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since discovering James's betrayal. On the ride back to Riversbend, they discussed practical matters. What supplies she would need when the purchase could be finalized, how soon she might be able to move in. Blake insisted she stay at his ranch until the cabin was properly repaired, which would take at least 2 weeks. "I can help with some of the work," Abigail offered. "I'm not helpless, despite my condition." "I know you're not," Blake assured her. "But Dr. Ellis was quite clear about you not overexerting yourself. Let my men handle the heavy work, the roof, the porch repairs. You can direct the improvements inside, decide what furnishings you need." As they neared Riversbend, Blake broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "The baby will come before harvest. Have you made arrangements for assistance?" Abigail tensed. It was a legitimate concern, one she'd been avoiding thinking about too specifically. "Not yet," she admitted. "I thought perhaps there might be a midwife in town I could engage. There is Mrs. Olson. She's delivered hundreds of babies, including my foreman's wife's twins, as I mentioned." Blake hesitated, then added, "But you'll need help afterward as well. Someone to look after you while you recover, to help with the baby." The realization of how unprepared she truly was hit Abigail with sudden force. She'd been so focused on securing a place to live that she hadn't fully considered the practicalities of giving birth and caring for a newborn alone. Tears pricked at her eyes and she turned her face away, not wanting Blake to see her moment of weakness. But he noticed anyway, his voice softening. "I've upset you. I'm sorry." "No," Abigail said quickly, wiping her eyes. "You're right to point out these things. I've been so determined to manage on my own that I haven't thought through all the details." Blake was quiet for a moment before saying, "My sister is coming to visit next month. She'll be staying through the fall. Sarah is a mother of 3 herself. I'm sure she'd be willing to help when the time comes." Abigail's pride rebelled at the thought of accepting still more charity, but practicality won out again. "That's very kind," she said softly. "Please thank her for me when you write to her." When they returned to Riverspend, Mrs. Ramirez insisted Abigail lie down to rest after the excursion. Exhausted despite her excitement about the cabin, Abigail didn't argue. She slept deeply and dreamed of a small garden full of vegetables and flowers, a baby laughing in a cradle, and strangely, of Blake Dawson's blue eyes watching over them both. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Blake arranged for the purchase of the property, and his lawyer drew up terms exactly as they had discussed. Abigail insisted on reading every word of the document before signing, a thoroughness that seemed to please rather than offend Blake. Work began immediately on the cabin. Blake's foreman, Michael Turner, oversaw the repairs, bringing a crew of ranch hands to replace the roof, fix the porch, and shore up the chimney. Inside, Abigail directed the cleaning and minor repairs, though she was consistently shooed away whenever she tried to do any physical work herself. "Mrs. Ramirez will have my hide if I let you lift so much as a broom," Michael explained apologetically when Abigail protested being relegated to a chair on the porch. Boss's orders. Blake himself rode out to check on the progress each day, often staying to work alongside his men. Abigail found herself watching him more than she should, admiring the easy way he handled tools, the respect his workers showed him, and the gentle authority with which he gave directions. He never raised his voice or showed impatience, yet the work progressed steadily under his supervision. In the evenings back at Riverspend, they fell into a comfortable routine. After supper, they would often sit on the porch, talking until the stars came out. Blake proved to be well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. He listened to Abigail's views with genuine interest, never dismissing her ideas even when they differed from his own. Gradually, Abigail found herself sharing more about her past stories of her childhood in Missouri, her education at a small ladies' academy where she developed a passion for botany, her dreams of someday writing a book about medicinal plants of the West. Blake, in turn, told her about his years working on ranches across California and Nevada, about his sister Sarah and her family in Boston, about his plans to expand Riverspend's operations to include more crops alongside the cattle. But Abigail noticed he rarely spoke of his life before coming west, and when he did, it was in the most general terms. There was a story there, she was certain, but she respected his privacy too much to pry. As the cabin neared completion, Mrs. Ramirez helped Abigail select furnishings and supplies from shops in San Jose. Blake insisted on providing the basics, a new mattress for the bed, a cradle for the baby, cookware for the kitchen, even curtains for the windows. "Consider it a housewarming gift," he said when Abigail tried to add these items to the debt she already owed him. "Besides, it's in my interest for you to be properly equipped to succeed." The day finally came when the cabin was ready for occupancy. Blake drove Abigail out himself, the buggy loaded with her few personal possessions and the many necessities he'd provided. As they approached, Abigail gasped in surprise. A small vegetable garden had been planted beside the cabin, already showing the first green shoots of corn, beans, and squash. A clothesline stretched between 2 trees, and a rocking chair sat on the newly repaired porch. "Michael's wife thought you might appreciate having the garden started," Blake explained, pleased by her reaction. "The growing season's well underway, but these should mature before the first frost." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "All of it." The cabin's interior had been transformed as well. The walls had been whitewashed, the floors scrubbed clean. The fireplace had been swept and laid with fresh kindling, ready for lighting. The bed was made up with linens Mrs. Ramirez had insisted on providing, and the cradle stood nearby, a small quilt folded inside it. In the main room, the table was set with simple dishes and a vase of wildflowers, making the space feel immediately like a home. Blake carried in her trunks and the supplies they'd brought, arranging everything according to her directions. By mid-afternoon, everything was in place, and Abigail stood in the center of the main room, a sense of amazed gratitude washing over her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, turning to Blake. "For all of this." Blake's expression was soft as he looked at her. "Your happiness is thanks enough," he said simply. Then, more practically, "Michael or one of the other hands will ride by each day to check on you. If you need anything at all, send word to Riverspend." Abigail nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that she would be alone here. The cabin was everything she'd hoped for, yet the thought of Blake leaving brought an unexpected pang of sadness. "I'll be fine," she assured him, as much for herself as for him. "Truly." Blake seemed reluctant to go, lingering on the porch longer than necessary. "Sarah arrives next week," he said finally. "I'll bring her to meet you once she's settled." "I'd like that," Abigail replied, meaning it. She was curious about the woman who had shared Blake's childhood, who might offer insights into the man who had become such an unexpected benefactor in her life. With final instructions about lighting the stove and securing the doors at night, Blake at last took his leave. Abigail watched until his buggy disappeared around the bend in the road, then turned back to her new home. Alone at last, she allowed herself to explore every corner, to run her hands over the smooth wood of the cradle, to imagine her child growing up in these rooms. That evening, as she sat in the rocking chair on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Abigail realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: peace. Despite the uncertainties that still lay ahead, the birth, the challenge of raising a child alone, the work required to make the small farm profitable, she felt a profound sense of rightness about where she was. And if thoughts of Blake Dawson's kind blue eyes and gentle smile intruded more often than they should, she attributed it to simple gratitude and nothing more. The first days in her new home established a routine. Abigail rose with the sun, tending to her small garden in the cool morning hours before the heat became too intense. She arranged and rearranged the interior of the cabin, making it more functional and homey with each adjustment. She began a journal, recording her daily activities and thoughts, planning for the future of her small farm. True to Blake's word, one of his ranch hands rode by each day, usually around noon, offering assistance with anything she might need and bringing fresh milk and eggs from Riverspend. Michael's wife, Elena, visited twice, bringing a basket of preserves and offering friendship that Abigail gratefully accepted. On the fourth day, Blake himself arrived, accompanied by a woman who could only be his sister. Sarah Dawson Harrison was several years younger than Blake, with the same striking blue eyes but fair hair where his was dark. Her smile was warm as Blake introduced them. "So you're Abigail," Sarah said, taking both of Abigail's hands in hers. "Blake's written so much about you in his letters that I feel I know you already." Abigail glanced at Blake in surprise, but he had turned away, ostensibly to tie up the horses. "Only good things, I hope," Abigail replied, ushering her guests inside. "The very best," Sarah assured her. "He mentioned you're expecting in about a month, 6 weeks if the doctor's estimate is correct," Abigail confirmed, one hand resting on her belly. Sarah nodded knowingly. "My first came early, so it's wise to be prepared," Speaking of which, we've brought some things that might be useful." She gestured to the parcels Blake was now carrying inside. "Baby clothes, mostly my youngest has outgrown them and they've plenty of wear left." "That's very kind, but you shouldn't have," Abigail began. "Nonsense," Sarah interrupted briskly. "Babies need things, and it's foolish to let good clothes go to waste. Besides, I remember how overwhelming it all seemed with my first. A little preparation eases the mind wonderfully." There was no arguing with Sarah's practical logic, and Abigail found herself grateful not just for the gifts, but for the other woman's matter-of-fact approach to her situation. Unlike many people she'd encountered since becoming visibly pregnant and obviously unwed, Sarah treated her with respect rather than judgment or pity. Over tea, another provision from Riverspend, Sarah shared stories of her own children, 2 boys and a girl, aged 7, 5, and 3, whom she'd left in Boston with their father and nurse for this extended visit. "Thomas couldn't get away from his law practice," she explained, "and I've been promising Blake a visit for years. When he wrote about you needing assistance with the baby, it seemed the perfect opportunity." Abigail shot Blake another surprised look. "You wrote to your sister about me?" "Before even telling me you'd done so." Blake had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I may have gotten ahead of myself," he admitted. "But Sarah's always looking for reasons to visit, and I thought he thought correctly," Sarah interjected smoothly. "I've been eager to see Riverspend again, and helping a new mother is something I'm quite qualified to do." She patted Abigail's hand. "Don't be cross with him. Blake has always tried to arrange everything perfectly ever since we were children. It's both his greatest virtue and his most annoying habit." Blake laughed, a deep, rich sound that Abigail realized she'd rarely heard. "Thank you for that character assessment, little sister." Sarah's visit did much to allay Abigail's concerns about the upcoming birth. The older woman was a font of practical advice, delivered with humor and understanding rather than condescension. By the time Blake and Sarah departed, promising to return in a few days, Abigail felt significantly more prepared for what lay ahead. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Sarah would visit every few days, sometimes with Blake, sometimes alone. She helped Abigail prepare for the baby, sewing additional clothes, discussing feeding and bathing techniques, sharing wisdom gained from her own experiences. Blake continued to check on the progress of Abigail's garden and make small improvements to the cabin, adding shelves here, fixing a squeaky hinge there. Abigail found herself looking forward to these visits with increasing anticipation. Sarah had quickly become a true friend, perhaps the first real female friend Abigail had made since leaving Missouri. And Blake's presence brought a warmth and sense of security that Abigail tried not to examine too closely. He was her benefactor, nothing more. That the sight of him riding up to her cabin made her heart beat faster was simply gratitude, she told herself firmly. As her time grew nearer, Abigail's energy waned. The summer heat made every task more difficult, and her increasing size limited her mobility. Sarah convinced her to move temporarily to Riverspend for the final weeks before the birth, arguing that it would be safer for her to be closer to town and the doctor. "Besides," Sarah added with a twinkle in her eye, "Mrs. Ramirez is desperate to fatten you up properly before the baby comes. She says you're still too thin." Reluctantly, Abigail agreed. She'd grown attached to her little cabin, but the practicality of Sarah's suggestion couldn't be denied. So, 6 weeks after moving in, she packed a small trunk and returned to Riverspend, installed once again in the blue room that now felt oddly familiar and welcoming. The evening of her return, after Sarah had retired early with a headache, Abigail found herself alone with Blake on the porch. The night was warm, with a gentle breeze stirring the leaves of the nearby oak trees. Fireflies danced in the gathering darkness, their tiny lights blinking like earthbound stars. "Thank you for opening your home to me again," Abigail said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Blake turned to look at her, his expression difficult to read in the dim light. "Riverspend will always be open to you, Abigail," he replied, his voice low. "I hope you know that." Something in his tone made Abigail's breath catch. "You've been more than generous. I don't know why, don't you?" Blake interrupted gently. He moved his chair slightly closer to hers, close enough that she could see his eyes now, serious and intent on her face. Abigail felt her heart begin to race. "I am not sure what you mean." Blake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "I've grown very fond of you, Abigail. Surely you must have realized that." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Abigail's mind whirled with confusion and a sudden, impossible hope. "Blake, I'm not in a position to. I'm not asking for anything," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know. Whatever happens, whatever you decide about your future, my feelings won't change the arrangements we've made. The cabin is yours regardless." Abigail felt tears sting her eyes at his generosity of spirit. "You hardly know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Blake replied with a small smile. "I know you're brave and determined. I know you're intelligent and kind. I know you love your child fiercely, even before meeting them." "What more do I need to know? My past," Abigail said hesitantly. "The mistakes I've made." "We all have pasts, Abigail. We all have regrets." Blake's expression darkened momentarily, then cleared. "But it's what we do with our second chances that matters." Before Abigail could respond, the baby kicked vigorously, making her gasp. Without thinking, she reached for Blake's hand and placed it on her belly. "Feel," she said simply. Blake's eyes widened as he felt the strong movements beneath his palm. A look of wonder spread across his face, transforming it. "That's remarkable," he breathed. "Remarkable and sometimes painful," Abigail admitted with a small laugh. "This little one seems determined to be a dancer." Blake kept his hand on her belly longer than strictly necessary, and Abigail found she didn't mind. There was something intimate yet innocent about sharing this moment with him. "Abigail," he said finally, his voice serious again, "I want you to know that I would welcome this child as my own if you ever felt you could." He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the right words. Abigail's heart constricted with emotion. The possibility Blake was suggesting seemed too wonderful, too perfect to be real. "I need time," she whispered, "to think, to understand my own feelings." "Of course," Blake agreed immediately. "There's no rush, no pressure. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's return, looking much recovered from her headache. If she noticed the charged atmosphere between her brother and Abigail, she gave no sign of it, instead chatting easily about plans for the following day. Later, alone in the blue room, Abigail lay awake long into the night, her mind turning over Blake's words again and again. Could she allow herself to believe in a future with him? To trust again after James's betrayal? And what of Blake himself? Was he truly prepared to take on another man's child, to face the gossip and speculation that would inevitably follow? She had no answers, only questions and the undeniable warmth that filled her heart whenever she thought of Blake's gentle smile and steadfast presence in her life. The baby came earlier than expected, on a hot August night 2 weeks after Abigail's return to Riverspend. She woke shortly after midnight with a sharp pain that told her the time had come. Sarah, who had insisted on sleeping in the adjoining room for just such an eventuality, sent for Dr. Ellis and Mrs. Olson immediately. What followed was a blur of pain and exhaustion for Abigail. She was vaguely aware of Blake pacing anxiously in the hallway, of Sarah's calm voice coaching her through each contraction, of Mrs. Olson's capable hands guiding the process. As dawn broke, casting golden light through the windows of the blue room, Abigail gave a final, desperate push, and her son entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of Riverspend. "A boy," Dr. Ellis announced, placing the squalling infant on Abigail's chest. "And a fine, healthy one at that." Tears streamed down Abigail's face as she gazed at her son for the first time. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved angrily at the world. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." After the baby was cleaned and swaddled and Abigail made comfortable, Sarah went to fetch Blake from his anxious vigil. He entered the room hesitantly, his face drawn with concern that quickly transformed to awe when he saw Abigail holding her son. "Come meet him," Abigail invited softly. "I'm calling him David after my father." Blake approached the bed carefully and peered down at the tiny face. "He's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "just like his mother." The look that passed between them in that moment was filled with unspoken feelings: tenderness, hope, possibility. The following days were a haze of exhaustion and joy for Abigail. Sarah and Mrs. Ramirez took turns helping with the baby, allowing Abigail precious hours of sleep between feedings. Blake kept a respectful distance but was never far away, ready to provide whatever was needed. A week after David's birth, when Abigail was finally strong enough to sit on the porch for a while, Blake joined her there as the sun was setting. David was sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, his tiny face relaxed in complete trust and contentment. "He looks more like you every day," Blake observed, settling into the chair beside hers. Abigail smiled down at her son. "Poor child. Let's hope he grows out of that." Blake laughed softly. "I hope he doesn't. You're beautiful, Abigail." She looked up, startled by the simple declaration. In the fading light, Blake's eyes were intensely blue, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "I've been thinking," he continued when she didn't respond, "about what I said before, about my feelings for you." Abigail's heart began to race. "Yes, I meant every word," Blake said quietly. "But I understand if you need more time or if you don't feel the same way. I just want you to know that my offer stands. I would be honored to help raise David, to provide for you both, to build a life together if that's what you want." Abigail looked down at her sleeping son, then back at Blake. The past weeks had given her time to examine her own heart, to recognize that what she felt for this man went far beyond gratitude. "I was so afraid to trust again," she admitted softly. "After James, I thought I'd never be able to believe in love again." Blake reached out slowly and took her free hand in his. "And now I think perhaps I was looking for the wrong kind of love," Abigail said. "What I felt for James was infatuation, excitement. What I feel for you is deeper, more real." Blake's hand tightened around hers. "What are you saying, Abigail?" "I'm saying that David and I would be honored to build a life with you, Blake Dawson." Abigail's voice was steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "If that's still what you want." Blake's face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "More than anything," he whispered. Then, careful of the baby between them, he leaned forward and kissed her for the first time, a gentle, reverent kiss that held all the promise of the future they might build together. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. David stirred between them, opening his eyes briefly before settling back into sleep, unaware of the momentous decision that had just been made above his head. "What about the cabin?" Abigail asked suddenly. "All your work, the arrangements we made." "The cabin will always be there if you want it," Blake assured her. "It could be a tenant house, or perhaps someday a home for David when he's grown, but I was hoping you might consider making Riverspend your permanent home instead." Abigail thought of the little cabin she'd come to love, with its cozy rooms and the garden she'd tended so carefully. Then she thought of Riverspend, with its spacious house and fertile land, its established routines and the people who had welcomed her so warmly. Mrs. Ramirez, who had already claimed David as a surrogate grandchild, Michael and Alina, who had shown her such kindness, and Blake, whose steady presence had become the center of her world without her even realizing it. "I think," she said slowly, "that home isn't really about a place. It's about the people you share it with." Blake's smile was radiant as he squeezed her hand. "Then welcome home, Abigail Greene." Their courtship was brief but sweet. Despite Sarah's insistence that they wait a decent interval for propriety's sake, Blake and Abigail were married just 3 months after David's birth, in a small ceremony at Riverspend with only close friends and neighbors in attendance. Sarah stood as Abigail's witness, beaming with approval as her brother and new sister-in-law exchanged vows beneath an arch of autumn flowers. David, resplendent in a christening gown that had once belonged to Blake's grandfather, slept through most of the proceedings in Mrs. Ramirez's capable arms, waking only when the small gathering erupted in cheers as Blake kissed his bride. "I think he approves," Blake laughed, taking his son, for he already thought of David as his own, from Mrs. Ramirez. The baby gazed up at him with solemn eyes, then broke into a toothless smile that melted Blake's heart all over again. Life at Riverspend settled into new rhythms. Abigail took over the running of the household from Mrs. Ramirez, though the older woman remained as cook and valued advisor. She started a larger garden than had existed before, applying her knowledge of plants to grow not just vegetables but medicinal herbs as well. In the evenings, she worked on the book she'd long dreamed of writing, with Blake's enthusiastic encouragement. Blake, for his part, found that having a family brought a joy and purpose to his life that had been missing before. He doted on David, spending every spare moment with the boy, and cherished Abigail with a devotion that never wavered. Together, they expanded Riverspend's operations, adding a small orchard and increasing the crop production while maintaining the cattle that had been the ranch's mainstay. The cabin remained, just as Blake had promised. Abigail visited often, tending the garden there and sometimes spending peaceful afternoons writing while David napped. It became a special retreat for her, a place to gather her thoughts and remember the journey that had brought her to this unexpected happiness. Sarah returned to Boston in November, with promises to visit again the following summer and bring her family to meet their new relatives. "I knew from Blake's first letter about you that he'd found something special," she confided to Abigail before leaving. "I've never seen him so content." As the first anniversary of their meeting approached, Blake surprised Abigail with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal embossed with her initials. Inside, he'd written an inscription: "For the story of our family, which began with a woman of courage and a man who recognized what truly matters. With all my love, Blake." That night, after David was asleep, they sat together on the porch as had become their custom, wrapped in a blanket against the spring chill. Stars scattered across the dark sky above, and the soft sounds of the ranch at night surrounded them. "Do you ever think about that day at the auction?" Abigail asked, her head resting on Blake's shoulder. "How different things might have been if I hadn't fainted, or if someone else had reached me first." Blake's arm tightened around her. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of never having found you, never knowing David, it's unbearable." "I was so angry when you insisted on bringing me here," Abigail recalled with a smile. so determined not to accept help, not to trust anyone again. And I was determined to help you whether you wanted it or not, Blake chuckled. Not my most tactful moment. Abigail turned to face him, her expression serious now. You saved us, Blake, not just that day, but every day since. You gave us a home, a family, a future. Blake touched her face gently, tracing the curve of her cheek with his fingertips. You gave me the same, he said softly. Before you, Riverspend was just a place I worked. Now it's truly a home. Inside, David's cry broke the moment. Abigail rose, but Blake stopped her with a gentle hand. I'll go, he said. You rest. Abigail watched him go, love filling her heart to overflowing. She thought of the frightened, desperate woman she'd been a year ago, standing at the auction block with nothing but determination and hope. How could she have known that her moment of greatest weakness would lead to such strength, such joy? As the stars continued their slow dance across the night sky, Abigail Greene Dawson offered a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for unexpected kindness, and for the love that had found her when she least expected it and needed it most. Inside, she could hear Blake's deep voice singing softly to their son, a lullaby his own mother had once sung to him. Soon David would have a brother or sister to share his world. Abigail hadn't told Blake yet about the new life growing within her, planning to surprise him on his birthday next week. Their family was growing, their love deepening with each passing day. From collapse at an auction block to the mistress of Riverspend in the span of a year, life had taken Abigail on an unexpected journey. But as she rose to join her husband and son inside their home, she wouldn't have changed a single step along the way. 5 years later, Riverspend had blossomed into one of the most prosperous ranches in the San Jose area. The main house had been expanded to accommodate the growing Dawson family. David, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his mother's green eyes and his father's quick smile. 3-year-old twins James and Rebecca, who kept everyone on their toes with their mischievous antics. And baby Elizabeth, just 6 months old and already showing signs of her mother's determination. Abigail's book on medicinal plants of California had been published to considerable acclaim in scientific circles, leading to correspondence with botanists as far away as London and Paris. She'd established a small but thriving business producing herbal remedies that were sold in shops throughout Northern California. Blake had become a respected figure in the community, serving on the town council and helping to establish a school that all children, regardless of background, could attend. His business acumen had allowed them to purchase adjacent properties, expanding Riverspend to nearly 1,000 acres of prime land. The little cabin where Abigail had briefly lived now served as the home of Michael and Alina Turner and their growing family. Michael had been promoted to ranch manager, overseeing day-to-day operations while Blake focused on the business aspects and spent more time with his family. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting, Blake and Abigail returned to the San Jose auction square, this time to donate a significant sum toward the construction of a new medical clinic to serve the town's poorer residents. As they stood together on the very spot where Abigail had collapsed all those years ago, Blake squeezed her hand. "From this spot to forever," he murmured, repeating the phrase they had exchanged on their wedding day. "Who would have thought that your fainting spell would lead to all this?" Abigail smiled up at him, her heart full. "I did," she said softly. "The moment you said she's coming home with me, something in me knew, even though I fought against it with every ounce of pride I possessed." Blake laughed, the sound still as warming to her as it had been the first time she'd heard it. "Your pride was one of the first things I loved about you," he admitted. "That and your courage." David tugged at his father's hand impatiently. "Papa, "You promised we could get ice cream when the boring speech was done," he reminded Blake. Behind him, the twins nodded vigorously in agreement, while baby Elizabeth gurgled happily from her perch in Mrs. Ramirez's arms. "So I did," Blake agreed, lifting his son onto his shoulders. "And a Dawson always keeps his promises, doesn't he?" "Always," David confirmed solemnly. As they walked away from the auction square, a family built from an act of kindness and grown strong through love, Abigail silently blessed the twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. The pregnant woman who had collapsed at the auction block had found not just a temporary refuge but a permanent home, not just a protector but a partner, not just safety but love. And in the end, that made all the difference.